All right, so what we have here is Chapter 11, DNA and Genes. This is our beginning of Chapter 11 notes. So what we want to do with this first task is look at image 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we want to look at them and choose 3 of these images out of the 5 and try to think what is similar or common, or what do 3 of these have that are common to one another. What is something that is similar about 3 of these things that they have in common? We have a structure here leading into a structure here. We have these little guys here. This should look familiar from meiosis and our studies of chapter 10. And then we have a doctor or scientist or researcher with a particular material inside a little vial, right? So measuring out a material inside the vial. The idea is to pick 3 and then try your best to link them with common ideas or how they may relate to one another. Good luck. All right, here's our problems or guiding questions that we have leading us through chapter 11. Some are the same as in chapter 10. Problem number 1, how will I change throughout my life? And as we learn about how DNA creates the body, we will understand also how throughout our entire life, DNA behaves differently at different times, and it is used in different ways at different times for different cells of the body. Problem number 2 is, how does lifestyle impact my health and development? And we're learning in chapter 11, we'll continue to learn in chapter 12, but just in general, our lifestyle and the experiences we have in life, the choices we make, does impact our DNA. It does impact not just the DNA, but what the DNA does for our cells and for our overall body. And then problem 3 is, we want to start exploring, and not as much in this chapter, but certainly in chapter 13, which is, how will technology impact our health, survival, and society? So there's a huge frontier in biology, genetic technology specifically, looking to cure disease, treat syndromes, and potentially even just allow people to have control over not just the genes we're born with, but potentially providing genes to new organisms, inserting new genes. Gene therapy is another form where providing genes to an individual whose versions they have may or may not work properly. But these are the 3 problems we want to focus on as we continue throughout this entire chapter, and then the genetics unit overall. It's the guiding questions of why this is important to us. All right, the first thing is to brainstorm on ideas you have about DNA. So in your notebook, you would create a graphic that looks like this, and you would organize some of your ideas in these boxes. So these boxes can be filled with what you think DNA is, or what you think DNA does. All right. The information down here essentially says that your responsibility is to come up with 4 ideas on your own that explain what DNA or what it does, and then use partners' information to complete the last 3. When you give your partners information, you also need to be sure to add their name, to give them credit, and to show appreciation and respect for their information. Everybody's information is equally useful, and it's just important for us to get a sense of what everyone thinks about what DNA is or what it does. You would say, hey, my name is Josh. Afterwards, I know more about DNA thanks to my partner, Jesus, because they said DNA did this or something about DNA, right? It's all about getting help. If any of the ideas you came up with match these, then be sure to give it a check. Place a check mark on one of the boxes if it has anything similar with this. All right, As usual, you don't have to copy the vocabulary word, but you do need to be sure to answer the question on the slide. To ensure you're organized in your notebook, please, before you answer the question, just go ahead and write the vocab word, the concept term, on the page before answering it, just so I can easily relate it to a particular slide. So I would write DNA, and then underneath I would try to answer this question. It says, watch video and summarize how DNA and chromosomes are related. In this example, you needn't watch the video, but you can always watch this clip. This clip doesn't so much show the relationship between chromosomes and DNA. It needs to get changed. Currently, it shows how DNA replicates itself, or how cells are able to create new strands of DNA or duplicate chromosomes as they grow and try to divide, and etc. All right, but just on the picture, you can use it alone. Summarize how DNA and chromosomes are related. So much like we have a similar graphic in the very opening slide, and it shows chromosomes, we have a strand of DNA, and we have a closer up view of potentially DNA. Just as you did there, you're going to look at this image of chromosomes here and just see, as you can see, this graphic right here shows chromosomes, but then it zooms up and looks at the individual DNA strand that makes the chromosome. But how would you describe the relationship from chromosome to DNA in this example? So in your best words, complete that idea. Summarize what you see in that graphic. All right, nucleotide is the next term. Again, you needn't write the definition. If you like writing it, if it helps you, great. If not, just write the term nucleotide and then begin answering the following questions. Your first task is to draw and label a nucleotide. So this nucleotide right here in a simplified structure should be drawn. The phosphate, draw the deoxyribose sugar, and then what's called the base. The base is a very important part. This is the same part as you see in the internal areas of DNA. And the base contains nitrogen, which is the unique part of the nucleotide. The base, which this is also a base, and the base is right here. Long story short, this, and this model are all representing nucleotide. And nucleotide is the smaller molecule that chemically bonds together to form the larger DNA polymer. So DNA is a polymer because it has a repeating pattern where nucleotides, like this simplified model of a nucleotide here, they stack and bond to one another to create that double helix structure. And the bases containing the nitrogen, the base, which is this, or you can look at it here, this is maybe a better representation of the molecular structure of the base. The bases help create the attraction between two separate strands in the center. So this is a base, a base, a base, a base, 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 base. And you can see that they're often referred to as nitrogen bases, just like you see here, nitrogen base, because they contain nitrogen. It's the only part of the nucleotide that contains the nitrogen. The second task for you to do is to draw this structure, just like you see on the right. Draw this, but draw it large enough that in each separate circle you could identify and write in a letter to represent the element. In other words, just as you see the elements oxygen, 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 and phosphate, you would draw that, you would write that in here. This would be phosphate, oxygen, 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 oxygen. This next part would be the CH2. So you'd put carbon, hydrogen, hydrogen. This next part here, which is kind of a circular structure, this would be the deoxyribose sugar, and you would write oxygen, carbon, 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 oxygen, hydrogen. But you would complete this entire structure until the elements that you can see clearly here are represented in this drawing here. And the idea is to just remember that nucleotides are composed of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus atoms. That the basis of life and of DNA is atoms and molecules bonding together in special arrangements. All right. This slide right here wants us to start investigating the base specifically. This drawing shows that there are 4 different bases. There's the adenine base, the guanine base, the thymine base, or the cytosine base. So there's 4 different nucleotides in DNA, and they're different from one another because of the base that they contain. So in this example, you could have an A or adenine base, you could have the guanine base, thymine base, or the cytosine base. So the base could be switched out in 4 different ways to create the 4 different nucleotides. All nucleotides have the same form of sugar, they have the same phosphate molecule. The only thing that makes them different is their base. And you can see here's the molecular structure of each. And 2 of the nucleotides have a double ring nitrogen base structure, and then 2 have a single ring nitrogen structure. All right, as you can see, scientists often don't draw the complicated structure of it. It would take time, so they symbolize each nucleotide in a simple way just by putting the A, the G, the T, or the C. A, G, T, and C. It says interpret A, T, C, and G are, so based on the picture, look where they're pointing. The A points to this part of the nucleotide. So A, T, C, and G really are just pointing to which part of the nucleotide. After you answer that, it says identify name for A, T, C, and G. So A stands for adenine. So in your notebook, you'd write A equals adenine, G equals guanine, T equals thymine, and C equals cytosine. Then it says compare and contrast. How are each nucleotide similar? So as you look at the structure of the bases, each base, what do they have in common? So look at each molecular structure and write one thing that they have in common, and then look at each nucleotide structure and identify what is different between adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine. What makes them not the same nucleotide? How are these bases different from one another? And that's your contrast, showing how one thing is different. Contrast. As you can see here, we have a definition for nucleotide, and you're more than welcome to write it again, okay? All right, DNA is 2 separate strands of nucleotides. It's the nucleotide base molecules that chemically bond the 2 strands together. So these are the nucleotide bases, the A, the T, the C, or the G. And they're represented simply here by shapes just to show how they kind of fit together like puzzle pieces. But as you can see, certain nucleotides fit together more properly than others. It says make a hypothesis. So in your notebook, make an effort to explain how this molecule, DNA, helps build our bodies. So what's your first effort to brainstorm and explain just how DNA is supposed to build our bodies, or how it makes us? We know that DNA contains genes, or alleles, that create our traits. How do we think that happens? This is your first opportunity to generate, based on what we've understood so far, how that happens. We have a helpful video here you can click on, or you can paste the link and then search and watch it to help you better understand. All right, we're still moving forward. We have more YouTube videos you can, of course, watch. All right, the next slide is identifying which nitrogen bases bond chemically. So based on this picture, so this structure right here is the C, or cytosine nitrogen base, and this structure right here is the G, or guanine base. So for number 1, but you got to go up and figure out what these 2 bases are attracted to one another. But right here we have a C and the G. So if I was answering 1, I would say C and G are attracted to one another and bond. Follow this up by finishing what the other 2 nitrogen bases are that bond together, that have an attraction. All right, number 2 is create an unwound DNA polymer that has 6 nitrogen bases chemically bonded using this structure here. So draw this in your notebook, and then based on the shapes and the patterns of which nitrogen base bonds to which, create the other side of this. So you're going to draw a nucleotide here, and a nucleotide here that would bond to this other side. And so you'd have a double-stranded drawing of DNA in your notebook. And it would look similar to this, where you draw one side, you draw its other partner here and here. It would look similar.